Hey, Dark Lord, can you go engineer and build 3 things so I can blow them up and finish this contract? Dark Lord, can you do that? Because I don't want to win around 15 times. Come on, go in. Hey, April Fool, can you go engineer and build 3 buildings? I gotta complete my contract.
Secure the control point.
How many times have you died?
Just keep it behind the thing so the guy doesn't snipe you.
That was getting heavy.
You are all weak. You are all bleeders. Last one alive, lock. Moving out.
Don't worry,
Thank
you're
you.
ghost on this.
Do you want me to leave the server now? Hey, April Fool, do you want me to leave the server? Okay.
The control point has been captured.
Jesus! I should not have juked him.
I love your death. That pyro is a spy. Forward! Looks like a mess.
You sure don't want me to leave the server? Jesus! What a fucking peak.
Spy! Spy in our midst, men! That pyro is a spy! Give 'em hell, boys!
Man, I am getting fucking awful at this game.
Alert! The control point is being captured.
hate this shit so much, man. This fucking sucks. Obama.
We got him. Thanks, soldier.
Our control point is being captured.
What the fuck? Why are there 3 people playing on this shit? So he went to the enemy team. I didn't notice that. What is that?
If God had wanted you to live, he would not have
We're
freed
starting with a strike.
Alert! Control point is being contested.
Spy! Spy round here!
No, don't shoot. It's your friend, dude. He's on our
Nice
team
try, mate,
because he's
but I'm the
booze, you can
best.
tell.
By your head, wanker.
Yo, great job, sniper on my team.
This is gonna be a real... Appreciate it, mate. So, ponies! Thanks, mate. Appreciate it, mate.
Fucking Jesus. That was amazing. Suck.
Got on my knife, mate.
Oh, I could have shot him twice. Oh man, that sucks.
You one-eyed drunk! Heads up! Incoming!
God damn. Fucking sniper? Oh man, these people just keep changing classes, huh?
You cannot burn me, I'm already on fire!
Lighting! 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 Incoming! Stay on a point!
I'm gonna fucking like set myself on fire. God damn it. Fuck. Who the fuck is Gab? Is that Gab the AI? Oh shit, is this a hacker? It's got one name, shitty profile. Oh, okay. 4 points to 9 from this person. So I have to farm this person, I guess.
Put dispenser here!
Holy Jesus. We got a pro sniper. Or watch out. One death. 150 HP is awful right now. Oh shit, he's like right there. Oh shit. Okay. Oh shit.
Alert. The control point is being contested. Alert. The control point is being captured.
Incoming!
God fucking damn this lag, dude. I dodged this shit. I fucking dodged that. Holy shit, there's two of them. Everyone's this class now. Great. No assist. Thank you, TF2. Thank you. Lost 4 points for dying to him. Gained 2 points for killing a different person. So I might as well just have done nothing. Basically, just do nothing, because it doesn't matter. I get fucked in the ass. I guess we can't leave spawn. Can't leave spawn. They have the ultimate setup. The best crit server setup ever. Don't fuck with me. Okay, so can I come up here? Yeah, I have to ask for permission. From fucking gravity. And no assist for the millionth time. Oh, so he goes back to sniper because he sucks at that class. Alright, cool. What the fuck is going on? So the Demo Knight's there, he fucks up my, like, movement. Okay? And then he kills me. That was some, like, aligning of the planets bullshit right there.
You are all weak. You are all bleeders.
Oh, you still die. Come on. Jesus.
The control point is being captured.
Yo, nice grenade. Yeah, I know, right? Oh, Jesus. He's like right there. This is not gonna go well for me. Wow. That's quite beautiful. Should have rocketed him. I don't know who the fuck this dude is.
Alert.
Played too much casual,
The
huh,
control
boy?
point is being contested.
Thinking you could just peek like that.
Alert. The control point is being captured.
Looks like a man, Private. Thanks, soldier. And on the point, maggot.
The control point is being contested. Alert. The control point is being contested. Alert. Alert. The control point is being captured.
Yo, dude, great job. That was amazing. I don't know how the fuck you did that, though. What the hell is going on over there? Damn, these are some SMG somethings. Really crave that SMG.
Alert. Our control point is being captured. Alert. Our control point is being captured.
Thanks, mate.
Yo, I think Gap's raging. He's AFK in spawn right now. Yep. Oh, he timed that, okay.
I didn't need your help, you know.
Não vai comer nada?
Não.
Vou salvar pra amanhã?
Yes.
É, mas a gente não vai ter 1 hora, 2, 3 horas atrás, tá?
Oh no, it means I have to eat right now. Fucking Jesus, man. He knows my tricks. Jesus Christ. He's gonna shit on our whole team, isn't he?
Keep lying down.
God damn. God damn. I'm just bleeding points at this point. But that was...
Point like that!
What? You gotta really shoot his thing. He rage quit? Yo, Christmas rage quit because I SMG'd him. That's hilarious. Oh, that's great. You fucking un-AFKs to kill me. I can't just be expecting bullshit because I'm not going to be able to pull anything off. You're not supposed to be able to counter bullshit, man. Like, what the fuck is this? Who is this guy? This guy just joined the game. Look, I'm his only kill. And this guy's probably also a sniper and gonna go, bam, right around the corner. And not even with an aimbot, he just has 10,000 hours.
Ace reflexes, you bomb. Appreciate it, mate.
I fucking hate this shit. How many hours does this guy even have? It's way too many.
Come on, mate.
Yeah. It's a Smurfall, right? 520 out of 520. We got like back band or something.
Everything above your neck's gonna be... Thanks, mate. Stupid bloody spy.
Holy shit. I don't like this at all. Fuck, dude. Holy shit. God damn.
Backstab that, you snake!
Oh shit. Oh, okay. Just a fucking spy.
Spy round here!
Yo, Navy, there's a spy really close to you. Okay. God damn!
Spy that, you fancy bloody wuss!
Yo, Navy's right up there.
I'm gonna plant one right between your eyes, you panther! Appreciate it, mate.
Get that scout. He's low. He's low as hell. Aww. Damn! Get him! There's a spy in the middle, by the way. Sniper, right on me. God fucking damn, dude. This positioning is insane. And I got a fucking lag.
Chop chop!
What's left of you in the soup time?
Stand on the bloody point!
Man, you suck. They fucking took that tower, man. They took that shit. I'm so tired for some reason.
Today is a good day.
Thanks for standing still, wanker. That's right.
come out of the slim end.
Thanks, mate.
Scottish Cyclops. How extinct!
Fucking jeez, man. I even got the shot off on him, and he misses the rocket. I had it on him, and I got sparks. Got fucking sparks. I hate this shit so much, man. Guess there are any health packs.
I don't usually kill more on this fast. They're going to bury what's left of you in the...
Wow. He rage quits. Everybody's rage quitting. That's fucking amazing. You lucky ass bitch. Is he getting fucking healed? Okay.
Teleport! Bam!
Turn out for you, dummy.
I love that little gun.
Erecting a dispenser.
Can't hit what ain't there.
Moving out.
What the fuck, man?
There. You ain't too fast for me and my machine. Are you? Bacon, bacon. Next time, tend to your own knickings. Sentry going up.
Shocking to see it, you know. And then you can draw it once you can actually see it like that. But before that, you're pretty much stuck in hand. So anyways, I think what happens with intelligence is that people are capable of abstracting, and then they can manipulate abstractions. And so let's take another look at what abstractions might be. So now part of the reason I think that abstraction is so useful is because things are really, really complicated. And it's going to be a lot more difficult to manipulate the actual thing than to manipulate some representative abstraction of it. So if you can get an abstraction that captures the gist of the entity, now how we do that is not exactly obvious.
Shit,
but
he
if
says
you can,
Sandman,
then
what
you
an
can
idiot.
expend a lot more resources concentrating on the relevant parts of the entity and a lot less time concentrating on the irrelevant parts. So, you know, so for example, if you ask a child to draw a house, what color the house is irrelevant. Now, why it's irrelevant is not exactly obvious. I guess it's because color can vary across houses. And color varies across all sorts of other things, and so color turns out to be a non-canonical element of house, so you can just dispense with it when you're thinking about a house. You'd say, well, it doesn't matter what color the house is, it's still a house. So what exactly defines those features that make something a house rather than something else are not that easy to figure out. You know, you could say, well, a house has 4 walls and a roof, and those are the external walls.
Jeez, man.
I guess you could identify the minimal necessary components, but even that's not so simple. And you could say a house is also something that someone lives in, which allows you to put caves as houses because
Damn, I was close to him.
Building the sentry.
Wow. So I guess I have to play seriously with him now. Gotta play seriously with everyone.
caves obviously share very little in common with, you know, a standard house. So my point is that it's difficult exactly to figure out what set of features we do use to determine whether something is a member of a class. There's this guy named Gigerenzer who's thought about this a lot, and he thinks that they're a combination of objective and functional, basically, and that enables us to do things like come up with the category of things you would take from your apartment if it was on fire, which is a really interesting category, right? Because most of the things that you're going to take bear very little resemblance. It's hard to see why they make a category. Pets, family members, probably in that order, photo albums, identification. What else might you take if you were your phone, I suppose? What else would you take out of an apartment during a fire? Well, you guys would be out on the street stark naked, obviously. So, well, you get the point, is that, you know, those things that I just mentioned seem to share very little in terms of objective features in common, but there's some reason that they still cohere as a category. All right, so anyways, why do you need to abstract? Well, because you can handle the complexity of the world better. Even your perception is a form of abstraction, you know, because when you look at someone, a lot of the abstraction is done for you because you just can't perceive very well. But when you look at someone, first of all, you only see the surface of them that's facing you and not the other surface, so that's a big limitation. You only see them now in this, you know, split second rather than extended across time. You don't see any of their microstructure, right, beyond the, you know, general pattern of the physiology at this level of resolution. You don't see anything below that. I can't see your cells or your organs or anything like that, which is actually a real problem often for us. And I can't see the systems that you're part of. So right off the bat, just to perceive gives you a low resolution representation. And a lot of that's limitations of your processing. Your eyes just can't zoom in that far. You don't have the cortical capacity to improve your vision. You know, plus how much do you really want to see at one time? No more than necessary, whatever that means. And evolution seems to take care of that problem. So your perception abstracts for you right away, but then I would say maybe you make a leap from perception to conception, something like that. And so that would be the leap from the perception of the actual object to the image of the object, and then a leap from the image of the object to the word. So it looks to me like a word is a representation of an image, which is a representation of an object or situation. It's something like that. So, and you need those because you have to deal with the complex world. So here's one way of thinking about it. So look at the top left corner of that diagram. So I called that the thing in itself. And what it is an array of dots, roughly speaking. And I think there's 360 dots there. And you might say, well, and then if it was a real world object, you could imagine that would be in 3 dimensions, not 2, because that's 2. And it would be transforming because it would be also extended across time. So, and it would have microstructures that were far smaller than that and macrostructures that were far bigger. But so even that is an abstraction, but it's I'm using a fairly complex abstraction to represent the thing in itself. That's the thing you cannot perceive, right? What something actually is. You just get an image. And then the next 5 things are ways you could look at that. So you could say, well, it's a rectangle. You could say it's 4 rectangles and forget about the dots. You could say that it's, I think that's 16 lines, or what is it, 32 lines? 24 lines. So if you were going to, if that thing in itself was an orchard and you were going to walk north, like south to north through it, that would be a good representation. You know, those would be corridors, roughly speaking. And then object 4 is a combination of object 1 and object 2. And then object 5 is, well, all that's blurred out are the little groups of 6 dots. And so you might say, well, what is that thing? And then the answer is, well, it's any of those 5 things. And so that's an interesting way of thinking about it too, because one of the things it shows you is that you can disagree about what something is right at the level of perception. And then you might say, well, which of those is the best representation? And the first answer might be, well, the most complex one, the top of the one in the left-hand corner. But that's not necessarily the case. It might depend on what you want the representation for. Like imagine, it's weird, because imagine you have a map. Okay, and so you think, well, I'm going to make the best map in the world. And so you make a map that's exactly the same size as the territory that it represents and has all the detail. Well, that's not any use at all, that thing, because you could just use the territory, right? So, you know, just because as a map gets increasingly detailed, to some degree, it's increasingly useless as a map. And so what you need is this weird combination between accuracy and simplicity. And so you want your map to be no more complicated than is necessary to take you from point A to point B. That's it. So because otherwise it wouldn't be simple to use, and the additional complexity would eliminate the utility of the map. So you might say that what we're trying to do with our intelligence is to get what we need with the least amount of effort possible. And you know, there's a sort of a Piagetian idea that's lurking behind that, which is, well, you have limited resources, you don't want to expend any more energy than is necessary, and you want to build representations of the world that suffice to keep you going now, and then next week and next month, and then, you know, alone and then in groups. And so you build a representation of the world that has some concordance with the thing in itself, but has this functional simplicity so that you can actually use it in the real world. All right, so back to this diagram. So I've got the object in 5 representations, and then there are ways of representing it linguistically at the bottom. So what that is, the words are basically a simplification of something that's already simplified. So, okay, so intelligence seems to have something to do with the process of functional simplification. Now, back to the library of questions. So you have this database of questions, and so then what you do is pull out 100 questions randomly, all right? And you want to pick out 100 because if you just pick out one, like if I asked you what the capital of Georgia was and I asked you what the capital of Georgia was and you got it wrong and you got it right, I couldn't really say with any degree of certainty that that means that you have more intelligence, because the probability that I'd get an accurate measure with one question is quite low. But if I used 3 questions, well then, you know, I would start to become, my measurement would start to become less error-ridden. And if I used 10, it would even be better. And if I used 20, for a personality questionnaire, the rule of thumb, and this is just a rule of thumb, is that if you don't have 20 questions in the questionnaire, then you don't have enough questions to really generate a reliable measure. So you'll still see single item measures used in psychology, but you can add additional accuracy by increasing the number of items. I designed an IQ test a while back, and we got pretty good reliability and pretty good validity. Reliability is, you know, you test the same set of people twice and the rank order of their performance stays the same. So if you got 90 on the previous test, you'd get 90. And if you got 95, because you're more intelligent in this example, if you got 95 in the last one, you'd get 95 on this one. So that's reliability. We could get a pretty reliable IQ test with 9 items, but it was substantially improved with 17. And with increments, you know, you get what would you call it? Diminishing returns. So 100's plenty. Okay, so you pull out 100 questions, and then you take 100 people, and you give them those questions, and then you score them, right and wrong, that's all there is. And then you sum the scores, okay, so basically that the sum behaves like the average. Let's say you average the scores, just to make the argument a little bit more straightforward. You average the scores, and so each of you gets the average of, calculated across the times that you were right and wrong. So it's an approximation of the frequency of how right you were. And then we rank order you, 1 to 100. That's IQ. That's all there is to it.
Fuck.
So now people say IQ doesn't exist. Well, that's annoying, because all they're doing is gerrymandering the definition of the word exist. Because you can do that. If you ask if A is equivalent to B, the answer is, it depends on what you mean by A and what you mean by B. It's almost always a foolish question, because you can take B and A and bend them and twist them in such a way that you can make one thing another thing without too much problem. People usually get around that by only using a word in a context, right? In a sentence or a phrase or a paragraph that defines the word, so that you can't weasel around like that. But more specifically in psychology, we have methods to tell if something is real. And if IQ doesn't pass the test of reality for a psychological measure, then no other psychological measures pass the test, because they're validated exactly the same way IQ is, and they don't work as well. So you can say, well, no, that's not real, but then you probably have to throw out the social sciences completely, insofar as they're actually sciences, because the same statistics are used to generate their findings. So you can't just say, well, this really powerful thing doesn't exist, well, a bunch of these weak things exist and they're measured the same way. You don't get to play that game. So, okay, so does it exist? Well, you can measure it reliably, so that's definitely something. Because you might say, well, does your shadow exist? Well, generally speaking, under normal conditions, you can measure your shadow relatively reliably. Does it exist? Well, it passes one test of existence. You can't detect it with a number of senses. You can't touch it, for example. But, whether or not something exists is actually a rather tricky question. But you can measure it and it's useful. And that's not a bad definition of exist. So, what's it good for? Well, it predicts major life outcomes, and importantly. So, and we can talk about the power of intelligence momentarily. If you were actually going to calculate an IQ score per se, you would take the rank order that I just described, and you would correct it for age. Because you can't really expect a 7-year-old to know as much as a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old. So generally speaking, if you take a technical IQ test, it will rank order you, but it'll only rank order you with people of the same age as you. So that's just another, it's an additional correction. Whether or not that actually gives you a more accurate estimate of IQ depends on what you mean by accurate. A very bright 7-year-old generally doesn't know enough to do much useful in the way of work, but they can learn extremely quickly. And so, if you compared 7-year-olds to people of other ages, purely in terms of their score on an IQ test, there's a high probability that you would underestimate their speed of learning. By the same token, though, by the time you're 40, you have a lot of accumulated knowledge. And so, if you only measured learning speed, then you would overestimate that 7-year-old's advantage over the 40-year-old. IQ is basically a unitary phenomenon, but you can fractionate it into very, very complicated for reasons that I'll tell you about in a minute. If you had to divide IQ into two, the way you would divide it would be into crystallized and fluid intelligence. And fluid intelligence would be roughly the ability to learn. And crystallized intelligence would be roughly a measure of how much you've learned. Now, those are separate to some degree, and here's why they're separate. As you age, your capacity to learn decreases. It's quite ugly. So by the time you're about 24, you're starting to get stupider from the perspective of being able to learn. And that's just pretty much a linear trip downhill until you depart the world. So it's nasty to see, because it's quite a steep degeneration. You can stave that off, by the way, with cardiovascular exercise and weightlifting. So that's the best way to keep your learning capacity intact. It's not to do cognitive exercises, it's to do physical exercise. And then as you age, then the amount you know goes up. And what happens is those two things actually tend to average out. So now you might say, well, if I'm claiming that IQ is this unitary thing, how can I make the claim that you can divide it into two elements and that those elements are in some sense separate? And I think the reason is for this. So your prefrontal cortex, roughly speaking, so that's the part of your brain here forward, you can think about it in part, it's the part that does the programming of motor activity, voluntary motor activity. But it also seems to be, so let's say you're doing something new, and you're pretty clunky and awkward at it, and then you do it more and more, and you get smoother and smoother and smoother at it, and you automatize it. What happens is you're using your prefrontal cortex, and to some degree, your whole right hemisphere, when you're first doing it, and then as you get better and better at it, the ability shifts to the left and then goes backwards. So what's happening to some degree is your prefrontal cortex is programming the rest of your brain. And you can think of fluid intelligence as a measure of the ability of your brain to program itself, and crystallized ability as a measure of how much programming is there. And then, so they're separate in that manner because they perform separate functions, but then you can also understand that the better your programmer is, the better the programming is going to be, so that inflates the correlation. And so you can have two separate things, functionally, that are even dissociable in terms of age, but because they work so tightly together, it's like, how fast can you dig a hole, and how big is the pile of dirt? Well, obviously those two things are different in some important sense, but they're going to be highly correlated, because the faster you can dig a hole, the bigger the pile of dirt. And so anyways, crystallized intelligence is often measured as verbal intelligence, but the better measure fundamentally is crystallized intelligence. Now, you know how we looked at the personality hierarchy, right? That was this. And what you see is 3 strata, roughly speaking: aspect, trait, superfactor. And it looks like the superfactors, I would say, the validity of those superfactors is not yet clear. You can get a lot of useful prediction by looking at the traits, and there's more and more evidence. There's about 400 studies now using the aspects. There's more and more evidence that you can also derive additional useful predictive validity from
fucking Jesus!
the personality down to the aspect level. So that's the highest resolution personality model we have. There are people who claim that there's now using the aspects. There's more and more evidence that you can also derive additional useful predictive validity from differentiating the personality down to the aspect level. So that's the highest resolution personality model we have. There are people who claim that there's something at the apex which you might call good personality, but I don't think so. I don't think so. You'd have to read the literature to understand the dispute. It's a statistical dispute, roughly speaking, but we've found in our research that stability and plasticity are only correlated at that point too. They're pretty separate. So I'm going to stick with that for now, even though it might be wrong. Okay, so
fucking hell, these hitboxes.
Blood on my knife, mate.
if you read the cognitive literature and the neuropsychological literature, you will find that neuropsychologists tend to assume that there are forms of cognitive ability that you cannot describe as IQ. And they make that claim because they'll take a test and they'll use the test to measure something, and then they'll correlate that with IQ. And the correlation will only be about 0.2 or 0.3. And so they'll say, well, that's not a high enough correlation to justify saying that those things are identical. The correlation should be more like 0.8 for them to be identical. But the problem is, let's say I had a measure of your IQ, and your IQ, and your IQ, and your IQ. And then I asked you 2 questions, and you, and you, and you, and I summed your answers, whether they were correct or incorrect. Now what would happen is, there'd be some correlation between your total score on those 2 questions and your overall IQ. Maybe it would be 0.3. But that wouldn't justify me in claiming that the 2-question IQ test is different than the full-scale IQ test. It's just worse. And you're going to run into this problem when you read psychological literature, and if you ever do any research, because it's very difficult to determine whether you get what's called discriminant validity, which is this thing measures this thing, and this thing measures this thing, and they're actually different, or whether you just have a lousy measure of this and a lousy measure of this, and so the correlation is low. Now, here's a neuropsychological test. And you could make the case that this is measuring something different than IQ. So, imagine you see an array of 12 pictures. They're just drawings. Drawings of a telephone and a boot and a chair. Just common objects, okay? So you see 12 of them.
What the fuck,
And then you have to click one.
Guess I will never use my crossbow on him.
They move. And then the next time you have to click one you haven't already clicked. And then they move again, and you click, and they move again, and you click. And you see, by the time you get to about 8 of them, you're starting to run into trouble, because it's difficult to remember more than 8 abstractions simultaneously. 7, actually, and some people claim it's as low as 4. That's the capacity of working memory, which is why we kind of like phone numbers to be 7 digits long. A lot of the things we want to just remember are 7 units long, and if we want to remember more than that, we chunk. Although, you know, if I show you some dots, okay, say, well, how many dots? 3. You don't have to count them. You can see 3 dots. You can see 4 dots. It's not obvious that you can see 5 dots. At that point, you start to go 3 and 2. And then if there's 6 dots, well, that's how they would be arranged on a dice, right? The reason they'd be arranged on a dice that way is because you could see 2 sets of 3 and infer 6. You know, if they're sort of randomly dispersed like that, I say, well, how many dots is that? Well, you have to count them. And what that shows you is that your working memory, which is really a function of fluid intelligence, is a very, very narrow thing. And it's like your vision. You know, remember we saw the gorilla video, right? And you can only pick up the thing that you're attending to. Well, working memory is like that. It's this narrow form of attention. And it sort of specifies unitary phenomena. I mean, that's not quite unitary, but it's close enough. And I think the reason that it does that, it's like, why is your attention so narrow, is because often what you're trying to do as you work in the world is to make binary choices. You know, you don't want to choose between 20 things. You want to choose between 2 things, because then when you choose between 2 things, you can actually act. If it's still 2 things, you can't act. If it's 1 thing, you can act. So imagine you go into a Chinese restaurant is a good example, because Chinese restaurants virtually always have like 400 items on the menu. And you might ask yourself, well, how the hell do you figure out what you want? And what you don't do is go through every single menu item and contemplate it, because you'd be there for a week. So what you seem to do is eradicate chunks. So you might say, well, I'm not in the mood for anything but fish. Okay, bang. 3/4 of the menu disappears, you know, and then you might go, well, I don't want it breaded, whack, and then another half is gone, and now you're down to maybe 8 choices. And, you know, you reduce that to 4 and then to 2 perhaps. Well, I'd like this or I'd like that. But the waiter doesn't care about that. The waiter wants to know which one you want, because until it's reduced to 1, you don't get to act. And so the reduced narrow strip that we use to perceive the world in partly is a consequence of processing inadequacy, but it's also partly because we really are trying to reduce things all the time to 0 and 1, right? Yes or no. So, okay, so back to this three-stratum theory of cognitive abilities. Now, you've got this array of 12 items, and it keeps shifting. And what I would do is score you by the number of duplications if you pick the same item more than once, you lose a point. So the maximum points you can get is 12, and people usually make 3 or 4 mistakes. And so I could take your score on that test. Maybe I'd give it to you 2 or 3 times just to make sure I have a reasonably stable indicator. And then I could correlate it with your full-scale fluid IQ. And I'd get a correlation of about 0.25 or 0.3. Now, if you don't know anything about psychometrics, you'd say, oh, well, that's obviously measuring something different than full-scale IQ, because it only correlates at 0.25 or 0.3. But what it turns out is, no, it's more analogous to the problem that we were just talking about, where I asked you 3 questions and tried to derive your entire IQ from that. It's just a bad measurement. Now, what happens is if you take the neuropsychological tests that people have developed that theoretically assess the function of different parts of the brain, and you factor analyze them and you extract out a single factor, the single factor looks exactly like fluid intelligence. Now, is it exactly the same as fluid intelligence? The onus would be on the person who claims it's not to demonstrate the difference. We did give university students a very extensive battery of prefrontal cortical tests and measure their IQ. And then we used the prefrontal cortical test average and the IQ to predict grades. And what we did find was the prefrontal tests predicted over and above the IQ. But we thought maybe if you took the prefrontal average and the IQ and you added them to predict grades, say that's a regression analysis, they both added in. So they predicted different parts of the variation. It added additional necessary information. However, if you took all the neuropsychological tests and all the individual IQ tests and you put them in one data set and then extracted out a single factor, so that would be fluid intelligence, roughly speaking, that predicted grades very well, and then what was left over didn't predict at all. So what we concluded was that neuropsychological tests, prefrontal cortical tests, test intelligence, and they test a slightly different thing than fluid intelligence tests do, but that isn't because they're testing something different. It's because fluid intelligence tests, the way they're currently constituted, don't sample the universe of potential questions as well as they should. So it wasn't that we discovered something different. We discovered a measurement error, roughly speaking. That only took 5 years, by the way. It took 5 years to figure that out. It was very annoying because when we started, I was trying to predict grades, and I didn't know the IQ literature very well at that point, because psychologists don't usually teach it very much, because IQ bothers the hell out of everybody. And so, and the neuropsychologists who have their own field are, they're motivated to make the claim that they've discovered something new, and I just took that on face value. But then we tried to predict, like, okay, if I'm going to predict how well you do at your job, well, I want to get a good cognitive measure if it's a complex job, because if it's a complex job, it keeps changing and you have to learn to keep up. And if you can't do that, you're not going to do very well. So
fuck this.
That would be bad for you and it would be bad for everyone
the fuck
around
the rockets come out of my dick.
And so we were trying to pick up additional information that would enable the accuracy of that prediction to be increased, and looked at the neuropsych literature, but at most, it was an ambivalent success. Okay, so how does that relate to this? Well, at the bottom tier, where it's the most differentiated, you have single tests. And they're only correlated with each other at about 0.2, maybe 0.3. So you might say, well, they're all measuring different things. They're not. They're all measuring the same thing badly. And then you might clump them. So let's say I ask you, oh God, maybe I give you a test that asks you tested your vocabulary with 6-letter words, and then I gave you another test that tested your vocabulary with 7-letter words, and another one that tested your vocabulary with 8-letter words. And I said, well, those are all different tests. Well, they would correlate quite highly, not perfectly, but I could clump them together and make one sort of super test out of them. And then I could take super test A and super test B and super test C and look at the correlations between those, and those would climb to about 0.5 or 0.6. And then if I clump the super tests together, which would be happening by the time we got to stratum 2 there, then the correlation between the tests would start to rise to about 0.7. And then if I collapsed all the super tests into a single measure, then the correlation between any of those stratum 2 tests and G, because that would be the highest level thing, G is general intelligence, that's roughly speaking fluid intelligence, the correlation between any of the super tests and G would be about 0.8. So the point of all this, there's no way of discussing this sort of thing without doing it statistically and technically, because there are statistical and technical processes. So what happens is that, now let's say, now you have a measure of fluid intelligence, okay? You've got this measure. And you take one of the stratum 2 sets of tests, and you use both to predict academic achievement. What happens is that the super factor, G, kills the rest of it. You're just not going to be able to find any of the tests in the bottom strata that are going to add to the prediction of what the general factor can give you. Now with personality, that's just not the case. You can't pull out a single factor that predicts how personality is going to influence jobs, performance across your life.
I fucking
If you add
hate this item.
neuroticism, if you take the single factor and you add neuroticism is going to kick the single factor out. Conscientiousness is going to kick the single factor out, and so forth. Because there isn't a single factor. It's not, the tests aren't highly correlated enough to say that they're all measuring the same thing to some degree. The personality traits really are different. You can clump them into plasticity and stability, but even there, you're maintaining a lot of validity. So if I took stability and used conscientiousness to predict job performance, conscientiousness would wipe out stability. It'd be a better measure. But you never get that. You virtually never get that with the lower tests in the IQ strata. Okay, now, I'm just talking about that. So that's a good representation of how these things are associated. So at the bottom you have the single tests, and then they chunk into, say, sequential reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and induction on the fluid intelligence side, and general knowledge and language development on the crystallized intelligence side. That's the red. And then they're all subsumed underneath fluid intelligence, which is the measure that you really want to have. Okay, so what good is that? Well, it basically correlates 0.5 with major life outcomes. And that's 25% of the variance, and maybe you can get it a bit higher than that, but we'll just stick with 0.5 as a representation. And so, let's say you take a bunch of students, 100 of them, and you want to sort them into those who will pass a class with a 50% failure rate. Okay, so you just pick them randomly. You're going to pass, you're going to fail, you're going to pass, you're going to fail. So that's no knowledge. I have no predictive knowledge whatsoever. So my validity, the validity of my classification is basically going to be equivalent to chance, 0, right? I'm only going to have a 50% chance of picking who passes and who fails. If I used IQ, if I had all your IQ scores, and I did the prediction, I'd get right 75% of the time. So it's a huge difference. It cuts the failure rate in half by using IQ. And IQ is a very good predictor of health. It's a predictor of longevity. It's a predictor of resistance to post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a predictor of, obviously, occupational status. It's a predictor of educational success. It's a predictor of income. It's a very powerful predictor. And here's another way of conceptualizing its effect. So imagine that you could choose how you were going to be when you were born. This is in North America, because it's going to vary by society, at least to some degree. You get to be born into a family that's at the 95th percentile for wealth, or you get to be born at the 95th percentile for intelligence. Who's better off at the age of 40? And the answer is the person who picks being born with an IQ in the 95th percentile at birth. It's more powerful predictor of long-term life outcome than familial wealth. So, and it shows up everywhere. Like one of the things we did recently was look at disgust sensitivity. We're going to talk a little bit about that when we talk about conscientiousness, because orderly people seem to be more sensitive to disgust than disorderly people. That seems to be why they're orderly. But the higher you are in IQ, the less disgust sensitive you are. Now, we don't know exactly why that is. Maybe it's because, maybe you could make the inference that IQ is related in some way to the physiological integrity of the cortex, rather than the limbic system, which, is the source of, say, emotions and motivations. And the more powerful it is, the more inhibitory capacity it has over the more fundamental motivations and emotions. You could make that case. The problem is that intelligent people don't necessarily seem to be any less impulsive. So, and you can have a pretty vicious personality disorder that's characterized by extremely disorganized behavior and a complete inability to put long-term plans into operation and still have a high IQ. So, one of the things we really can't figure out, it's just a hell of a thing to try to figure out, is like the relationship between IQ and industriousness is 0. And that just makes no sense to me, because most of the brain models are predicated on the idea that your ability to engage in long-term planning is a factor that's associated with intelligence. But then industrious people seem to not only engage in long-term planning, they seem to do it right, so that if they're more industrious, they put their plans into operation and then the plans actually work. But it's not correlated with IQ. So then I can't figure out, well, obviously the industrious person in some way is able to regulate their own behavior. They're not procrastinating, for example. And you'd think that the ability to not procrastinate would be a cognitive feature, but it doesn't seem to be. And we have no idea what makes people industrious, and we can't figure it out. So it's this incredibly potent predictor. It's just about as powerful as IQ. And we have no idea what it is. So if you have a smart idea about that and you want to pursue it, feel free, because there's a big mystery there that no one's been able to crack, and we've been at it for a long time and have had almost no success. We had people do things like give them sentences of N's, M's, and U's, sort of randomly distributed, and then we'd have them count the U's, like a whole page of sentences. They're not sentences, they're just strings of letters. Count the U's. How useless, you'd think that someone industrious would do that better. It's like they don't. That's an IQ test. The people who can count the U's faster have higher IQs. Almost everything that you would do where it has to do with manipulation of abstractions of any sort, even something that basic, seems to be fundamentally associated with IQ. People with higher IQs have slightly bigger heads if you control for body size. They have slightly bigger brains if you control for body size. The axons on their neurons are a bit thicker, so the electrical messages seem to travel a little bit more efficiently. They are slightly faster in simple reflex tests, so it goes right down to the level of, because they're simple reflex, light goes on, push a button. There's not many neurons mediating that response, chains of neurons. There's only a few neurons communicating so that you can do that. But even at that relatively simple processing level, IQ is associated with speed. So there's a physiological component. You're less likely to develop Alzheimer's disease if you have a high IQ. And maybe that's because your brain is just more robust, so you could sustain damage, say, of up to 50% of your brain, and you wouldn't even show it if you have a sufficiently high IQ. Whereas if you're on the bottom end of the IQ distribution, you seem to be much more susceptible to physiological damage. Nutrition is a big predictor of IQ variation. So, and a lot of that's been hammered out of modern societies, So 150 years ago, people's IQ was pretty tightly associated with their nutritional status. But now, there are very few people in North America who don't have enough to eat, even though there's some variation in quality of diet. And that's flattened out a lot of the cultural variability in intelligence. Okay, so this is this guy named Hemphill did this paper, an American psychologist, a while back. And one of the things he was interested in doing, remember we talked about effect sizes, right? How big is an effect in psychology or in the social sciences in general? And people have used rules of thumb that 0.5 was a moderate effect and 0.3 was a minimal effect and 0.2 was starting to diminish to the point of non-utility. But what Hemphill did, instead of guessing, because that was just a guess, was actually go and look at papers that were published in psychology to see what effect sizes were being reported. So it's an empirical analysis of how big the effects that psychologists and other social scientists report. And so what he found was that the highest third of papers, so the third of papers that had the biggest effects, reported effects from 0.35 to 0.78, the middle third from 0.21 to 0.33, and the lower third from 0.02 to 0.21. So, and is there another? Yeah. If you look on the left side here, you see that an R of less than 0.15 characterizes the first quarter of published studies. An R of 0.15 to 0.35, the next quartile. So 50% of psychological studies report an R of less than 0.35. 90% report an R of less than 0.5, and only 7 to 8% report an R of 0.5 or above. So what that means is that the relationship between IQ and, say, academic performance or long-term life income is higher than that reported in all but about 5% of psychology studies. Okay, so here's an interesting, you might say, again, in order to determine whether something exists, you have to be able to measure it, and then it has to be good for something. So it has to be grippable and has to be usable as a tool, we'll say, for the sake of argument. What sort of IQ do you need for what kind of job? This was derived from a company called Wonderlic, and Wonderlic does employment testing. Psychologists usually don't use the Wonderlic test. It's a relatively short IQ test, and it's a good test. I think psychologists don't use it because it was developed commercially, but we tested the Wonderlic out a lot, and it has excellent psychometric properties. It's a very good IQ test. It probably errs a little bit in testing crystallized IQ,